By 1989, Pablo Escobar had already won. Not almost won. Won. He controlled 80% of all cocaine entering the United States. $420 million a week. He had bribed judges. He had bought politicians. He had built a private zoo on a 7,000-acre estate with its own airstrip, its own soccer field, and dinosaur statues at the front gate. He had been elected to the Colombian Congress. He had offered to personally pay off Colombia's entire national debt. $10 billion in exchange for one thing: that the government leave him alone. He was not a criminal operating inside a system. He was a system operating inside a country. And for a decade, that system worked because Escobar understood one principle above everything else. Every system has a price. Judges had a price. So politicians had a price. Police officers had a price. You either paid it in silver or you paid it in lead. Plata o plomo. Silver or lead. That principle had made him untouchable inside Colombia for years. Then he applied it to the wrong system. November 18th, 1989. Avianca Flight 203. A domestic passenger flight departing Bogota. A bomb planted in the cargo hold detonates midair. 107 people fall out of the sky. 2 of them are Americans. That detail, 2 Americans, pulls the United States government directly into the conflict, not as observers, as participants. That bombing wasn't a crime, it was a declaration. And the wrong system didn't have a price. Escobar spent a decade proving that violence could bend any system. He was right about every system except the one he declared war on. To understand why that war was unwinnable from the moment he started it, you need to understand what drove him to start it, and what he believed he was protecting that was worth turning Colombia into a battlefield. It came down to one word. One legal mechanism the Colombian government had just handed to the United States. One word that Escobar said he would rather die than face. Extradition. Escobar was not afraid of the Colombian government. He had spent years proving he didn't need to be. He bribed their judges. He bought their politicians. He killed the ones who couldn't be bought. The Colombian system was penetrable, manageable. The American federal system was none of those things. No amount of money could reach a federal judge in New York or Miami. No cartel hitman could intimidate a U.S. prosecutor into dropping charges. No bribe could stop extradition once the paperwork was filed. And Escobar knew it. He said it publicly. He would rather have a grave in Colombia than a jail cell in the United States. That wasn't bravado. That was a precise assessment of what American prosecution meant for a man who had spent his entire career controlling the system around him. In the U.S., he would control nothing. In 1984, Colombian President Betancourt signed the extradition treaty with the United States. That single decision changed everything. Within weeks, Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was shot dead on a Bogota highway. 2 gunmen on a motorcycle pulled alongside his car in traffic and opened fire. That was not a random killing. It was a message, signed by Escobar, addressed to the Colombian state. The message was simple. Reverse the treaty, or this continues. He formed a group he called Los Extraditables, the extraditables. Their motto, better a tomb in Colombia than a prison in the United States. He believed that enough violence directed at the right targets would force the government to back down. He had made governments back down before. What he didn't account for was what happens when the violence becomes too public and too large to negotiate around. Every action produced a harder response, not a softer one. 3 presidential candidates assassinated, an attorney general assassinated, over 1,000 police officers killed in Medellin alone. November 1985. 35 armed men stormed the Colombian Supreme Court in Bogotá. 11 justices killed. Documents relating to extradition cases destroyed in the siege. Escobar believed he was eliminating the threat. He was multiplying it. Because here is what his strategy missed. Every time the violence escalated, the government's justification for fighting back grew stronger. Every assassination made backing down politically impossible. Every bombing made negotiation look like surrender. November 1989. 9 days after the Avianca bombing that killed 107 people, a truck bomb detonates outside the DAS Security Agency headquarters in Bogotá. 50 people killed. Over 2,200 injured. The United States, now directly invested after 2 of its citizens died on that plane, begins funneling resources, intelligence, and training into the Colombian response. Escobar had spent 5 years trying to force the government to reverse the extradition treaty. In 1991, he succeeded. The new Colombian constitution banned extradition of Colombian nationals. He had won, and he had made himself, in the process, the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere. The victory cost him more than the threat ever would have, because the system he had been fighting was no longer the same system, and he had forced it to become something harder, something that could not be bribed or intimidated back to where it started. In June of 1991, the same day the Colombian Congress voted to ban extradition, Escobar surrendered. He had negotiated his terms. 5-year maximum sentence. No extradition. His own prison. Built to his specifications. In the mountains above Medellin, La Catedral, the cathedral. It had a football pitch, a jacuzzi, a casino, a disco, a waterfall, a rotating bed, staffed entirely by guards he had chosen himself. He continued running the cartel from inside, received over 300 unauthorized visitors, held meetings, gave orders, moved money. The government had given him a luxury compound and called it prison. He had beaten the system again, or so it appeared. July 1992. Escobar summoned 2 senior cartel lieutenants to La Catedral, Fernando Galeano and Gerardo Moncada, when he suspected them of skimming cartel revenue. He killed Galeano with a pool cue, had Moncada beaten to death, dismembered, and burned inside the compound. Their widows went to the press. The government learned that Escobar had committed murders inside the facility they had allowed him to build. President Gaviria ordered his transfer to a conventional prison. Escobar had anticipated this. During construction, he had mortared a section of the outer wall with deliberately weak concrete, an escape route built into the prison from the start. When the transfer attempt began, his wife warned him by phone. He kicked open the wall and walked out. The escape looked like another victory. It was the moment the endgame began, because the 2 men he had killed inside La Catedral, believing he was untouchable, had family, and that family was about to build the coalition that would destroy him. The escape removed every remaining constraint on the government's response. There was nothing left to negotiate around. No surrender deal, no prison arrangement, no political solution that didn't end with Escobar in custody or dead. Colombia formed the search bloc, 600 men, trained by U.S. Delta Force, supported by the DEA, the CIA, and Navy SEALs. Electronic surveillance equipment provided directly by the United States government. The most sophisticated manhunt Colombia had ever assembled, funded, and directed by the most powerful intelligence apparatus in the world. And then came something the government hadn't built, something that assembled itself. Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. Former allies who had watched him become too dangerous to remain loyal to. Paramilitary fighters, funded in part by the Cali cartel. Escobar's rivals, who understood that his war was destroying the entire industry they all depended on. Los Pepes assassinated over 300 of Escobar's associates, lawyers, and family members. They bombed his properties. They dismantled the financial infrastructure of the Medellin cartel, targeting the accountants, the lawyers, the white-collar network that moved the money. The widows of the two men he had killed at La Catedral helped found the organization that hunted him. The men he had murdered inside the prison he had built to protect himself had assembled the coalition that would finish him. In 1992 and 1993, Medellin was the murder capital of the entire world. Over 600 police agents killed during the manhunt. Escobar paid his sicarios per search block member. The system he had declared war on had not bent. It had sent everything it had, and he was running out of places to hide. December 1st, 1993, his 44th birthday. A safe house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin. Cake, wine. He called his son. That call lasted too long. The search block was triangulating every signal. Electronic directional finding equipment provided by the United States, tracking every transmission made from Medellin. They had his location within minutes. December 2nd. Colombian forces stormed the building. Escobar and his bodyguard made it to the roof. Both were shot and killed. A bullet entered Escobar's right ear. 16 months after walking out of La Catedral. The cartel he had built, the organization that had controlled 80% of the world's cocaine supply, had already collapsed around him before he died. Former allies had turned. Former soldiers had cooperated. Now Los Pepes had dismantled the infrastructure. The search block had hunted his organization into the ground. By the time he was killed on that rooftop, there was almost nothing left to inherit. The DEA's own assessment of the Medellin cartel's collapse was precise. Its reign of relentless public terror against the Colombian government had driven Colombian authorities to serious action that led to their ultimate defeat. Not outside pressure, not a superior military force. The cartel's own strategy, the decision to fight the state directly, had produced the response that destroyed it. While Escobar was fighting the Colombian government, the Cali cartel was watching. They drew a different conclusion from everything they saw. They passed themselves off as legitimate businessmen, invested in their country's future, earned public respect, avoided the kind of violence that forced governments to respond with everything they had. They had watched the Medellin cartel force the state to fight, and understood the only rational conclusion. Don't fight the system. Work inside it. Escobar's mistake wasn't violence. Criminal organizations use violence. His mistake was direction. He pointed that violence at the state itself. And a state, unlike a rival cartel, unlike a judge, unlike a police officer, cannot be killed, bribed, or intimidated into permanent submission. It can be pressured. It can be negotiated with. But the moment it decides to respond with full force, every resource, every alliance, every tool available, the organization fighting it has already lost. Because the state's capacity to absorb punishment and escalate in return has no ceiling. Escobar's did. He didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he forced a system stronger than his own to find out exactly how far it was willing to go. And the answer was further than he could survive. Which criminal organization looked at what happened to the Medellin cartel and built itself specifically to never make the same mistake? Drop it in the comments. If this breakdown was worth your time, you can leave a like.